How was that?
That was good. Good being in the water. I jumped into the ocean.
So the story behind each person's verse is, how did you discover Baha'u'llah and what was that process like for you? So for me, both my parents are members of the Baha'i Faith, and so I always knew about Baha'u'llah from a young age, but each person has their own journey. So for me, I didn't actually really feel that connected in the Baha'i community. So it wasn't until my early 20s where I really started investigating for myself. And one of the things in the Baha'i Faith that always really resonated, but that I never really investigated, was this idea of the oneness of religion, and that all of the religions and divine messengers of God were all part of one progressive revelation over time. And so in my early 20s, I decided, I'm gonna actually investigate that. I'm gonna read and study these messengers and their holy texts. And around that same time, I also got attracted to service, and seeing that really deep down, the best way to serve is to bring this message of Baha'u'llah, to bring the message of the oneness of humankind and unity to the world. That is actually what's gonna solve the world's problems. And that really activated in me something that I began to just search more and more and more. And I talk about the search for truth, went from a spark into a flame into a fire. It just started off with something small, and then it just became this thing where I was reading all the time, to the point where it was like, yeah, this is my faith and I want to live it out. I end the verse with, I live to give myself to build a new civilization. And that's really the whole idea of the Baha'i Faith. And the message of Baha'u'llah is to transform the inner self and then also transform the society around us. And I think that's also what really attracts me to being involved as a Baha'i, is this idea of transformation.
My rap verse, I infinitely sought for pieces of infinity. Essentially, since I was young, I've always been interested in looking or investigating the things of life, or anything that might be like philosophical, anything that really challenges our perspective of life. Or one of the places that I naturally began to investigate is arena of religion. As I began to look into it more, I felt like I saw a lot of hypocrisy. And then one day I met a young woman who was a part of the Baha'i Faith, and me being like a helpless romantic, began to want to talk to her and whatnot, and be involved in her life. And then so that was a huge part of who she was. And so I was like, okay, well, let me check this out. Let me see what it's about. And the Baha'i Faith speaks a lot about progressive revelation, which is like all of the prophets, Muhammad, Buddha, Jesus, Moses, all of them come from one God. And to me, that really resonated as true. Basically, I found a girl with the canteen. She had water, the water of life that I needed, which is the Baha'i Faith. And that's basically the story behind my verse.
In high school, I found the Baha'i Faith through a friend, and I went through this process of investigating the religion. And I have a lyric that's weighed down by the past. I couldn't move on, and I was basically just thinking of my experiences with religion. I had a lot of bad experiences with other people trying to get me to become part of their faith, and so I was skeptical of organized religion. But the pearl was so vast, I had to surge on, when I found the Baha'i Faith. And when I was looking at these writings and these teachings, it just hit me to my core, and it was just kind of this is exactly what I believe. I've been looking for this. And in a way, Baha'u'llah found me and then chose me to be part of this, because the way that I found this faith was just not a mistake. Everything was clearly with divine intervention and by design. I went through a process of where I was with the Baha'i community very deeply, and then I was away from it. So then I went through a period of darkness. I was accustomed to darkness, substance abuse and alcohol and things like that, and just getting into a bad environment for my own progress. And then I battled with Alcoholics Anonymous and those sort of things. And so then I was able to get sober, and I really attribute the Baha'i Faith for being able to enrich my life. And that whole verse is just I went from this place of knowing the religion and my past with the religion and wanting to accept it, then being away from it and going through that darkness, and then moving on and just being yeah, this religion is for me and my life is much better through the religion.
It starts off in 5th grade when I first was there's no God, and I became atheist, and that lasted until about I was 22. And it kind of transverses through me going through my activist phase, where my brother was a really big influence, where he's listening to Mumia Abu Jamal, you know, and understanding his story, his struggle, and just thinking about the world around me in a critical way, where I'm like, yo, there's a lot of injustice. Through my friends, I got involved in the Baha'i Faith through different things I was a part of. And even though I was interacting with the Baha'i Faith, I was still atheist. And then it all comes down to this moment where I kind of made this choice where I just let go of everything that I thought I believed. And after that, I really dedicated myself to this faith and trying to understand what it is to be a good Baha'i and what it is to be someone who is trying to push humanity with a group of people collectively.
Late 2000s, 2008 through 2010, I was really kind of coming into like the activist scene in Phoenix. We were working against a lot of different forces and institutions that were at that time very anti-people, very anti-community. During that time, Sheriff Joe was leading raids, going after working class people. My approach up until that point was very militant. I saw the solution as being we had to tear down the system so that we can build a new system through connecting with different Baha'is and kind of learning about the Baha'i Faith and what their approach was to addressing the issues in the world. It also lined up with what I felt in my soul was the right direction, the right approach to addressing the world's needs. So I started to look into the faith, started to read some of the writings and have some conversations with different people. And my verse is about kind of that process, about realizing that the best solution to these worldly issues is to get back down to a spiritual foundation where we're addressing the underlying needs of the community.
Hear that old tin can kicking out a crazy beat.
The story behind my verse is kind of the story behind my life. In terms of, so the idea of treasure being, you know, finding the revelation of Baha'u'llah, and it's kind of like a pathway. So my verse has a lot to do with being lost and treasure maps and finding the treasure. So I think that it's really sort of like, as my verse goes on, it's kind of like I'm going on a journey to finding the treasure. So yeah, that's really the main idea behind my verse.